Hey everybody, welcome to the Real United States, and it's 50th anniversary time again today. Well, not specifically today. In this series, we have been covering the events of 1969, and usually on the anniversary date, meaning specifically that day this thing happened. This time, we don't have a specific day, because this is the 50th anniversary of the release of a book which didn't have a release day. It came out in 1969, 50 years ago, but it didn't have, not like, some things today. Most books are usually published in the year, and they don't have a release date. They're not like movies or songs or things. They're published and distributed when they are. So, and this is also a weird one in the respect that the subject matter is, I don't know, maybe a little sensitive, and so I run the very real risk of being demonetized on this one, which I suppose is not really a big deal. But this is the 50th anniversary of the publication of On Death and Dying. It actually had a longer title, which I will put down here below. Whole thing. Written by Dr. Elisabeth Kübler-Ross. Now, I actually own a autographed copy of Dr. Kübler-Ross's book. Unfortunately, I don't have it here to hold up and go, but I do, trust me. Dr. Kübler-Ross, Swiss-born, but became an American citizen in the late 1950s when she married another medical student and moved to the United States. I think it was 1958. So roughly a decade before she wrote this book. And the Kübler-Ross model was the 5 stages of death and dying. I'm sure you've all heard of it. Was it denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance, if I remember correctly, from university. And that's one of the reasons that this is probably important to me. Although the Kübler-Ross model has since been argued against, I should say, criticized and argued against by various people of letter. It's still a widely known and easy to handle premise in psychology, but when I took psychology the first time, it was only roughly a decade after the book had been published. So this was still the hallmark in psychological thinking for the process of grief and how we react to it going through our own demise, and also as it was later expanded in how the stages, the emotions that we go through. It's called stages, but they're basically emotions. The loss of those close to us, or any kind of feeling of loss. Eventually, it became to encompass later on in Dr. Kübler-Ross's career. She expanded it to include the feeling of loss in general. Could be the loss of a job, a breakup of a relationship. It was expanded. Now, like I say, this was cutting edge psychology when I first took college level psychology, and it's something that's always spoke very near and dear to me, and recently, of course, especially because a little more than a month and a half ago, I lost 2 very close friends, and there's a process that you go through of grieving and dealing with loss, and of course, because they both died from cancer, it screwed with my head and has made me think a great deal about my own mortality. And so when I get a chance, I got to dig out Dr. Kübler-Ross's book and reread it. Because, it's one of those things that might be good for me. I don't know. But this was a period of time when loss was, I think, a popular topic. We were long past the days of Freudian psychology, classical psychoanalysis, and but just around the time, just after I was born, actually the year after I was born, a gentleman you may have heard of by the name of C.S. Lewis wrote a book called A Grief Remembered. Or A Grief Observed, A Grief Observed. And it basically was his personal feelings and observations about the grief process after the death of his wife. And it was actually considered kind of controversial when it actually was published in 1961. It was written in 60, came out in 61. Because C.S. Lewis, he had published it originally when he was alive. He published it under a nom de plume, N.W. Clerk, because he didn't want it associated with his name. He had been a amateur, I guess you'd call it, or somewhat amateur theologian, in addition to being a novelist. And so the process of grief sort of made him question his faith, I guess. And I haven't read the book personally. I've seen excerpts from it. Anyway, the book came out 61. Kübler-Ross had just gotten her medical degree in Zurich in 58 and came to the United States. So the book had just come out a couple of years after she had gotten here and was doing her residency in psychiatry. She had wanted to be actually a pediatrician, but she got pregnant, and this precluded her, for some reason, from doing her residency in pediatrics. So she decided instead to pursue psychology, and maybe just as well, because she excelled at it. So she would have just been coming of age, if you were, at the time that Lewis's book came out. Now, whether this had an influence on her or not, I have no way of knowing. I'm not sure if anybody could be certain. But Lewis, you got to realize, like I said, was a very popular, well-known artist, writer. And you may know him best for having written the Chronicles of Narnia. So maybe, oh yeah, that's okay, yeah. So, here's a young woman fresh out of medical school, and this book is popular. I'm thinking it's very possible that this may have influenced the direction of her studies, because she started dealing with and working with people that were dying, and was appalled by how they were being treated here in the United States. And so she was giving lectures when she took a position in the early 1960s in Colorado at one of the medical schools. I forget which one, but it's not important. She started compelling her students to sit through lectures, or I guess it's seminars, lectures, whatever, by terminal patients. So that these young people who are going to become medical practitioners would have some kind of understanding and learning about coping with those who were dying. So at least in that respect, her work was, I think, groundbreaking. And please don't leave comments down below citing Katzenbaum and his rebuttal of her work. I'm familiar with it, folks, okay? I don't want to hear it. I appreciate the thoughtfulness, but it's not necessary. Anyway, I don't think anything really has supplanted Dr. Kübler-Ross's work in the 50 years since it was published. Certainly on a very, very technical level. For those who actually go on and study psychiatry and psychology, there have been, new theories and new research and new work that has been done that I'm sure has contributed greatly to those practitioners dealing with hospice and with, the process of grief and loss. But I don't know that her work will ever necessarily be, come out of date. I think even though it's not this very neat chronological sequence that they propose when you're learning it in school, you can skip around or you skip parts of it. Maybe you only have 4 or 3 or something, But for example, the bargaining issue, which is in the middle. Bargaining doesn't probably pertain to somebody who is not a person of faith. If they have no belief in a higher power, then bargaining is probably not an option that's ever going to cross their mind. So maybe it's 4 stages for them. But I think we all have, at least those of us we got a few years on us, have experienced enough loss to know, there is a process. There's a number of different emotions we go through before we're finally, okay with it again, before the grief subsides. So whether that's facing our own mortality or the loss that we suffer when somebody else is gone, there's obviously, it's not just one emotion. There's a number of emotions, and they may last different periods of time and come and go. It's it's the proverbial roller coaster. And Dr. Elisabeth Kübler-Ross was the person who did the groundbreaking work on it 50 years ago this year. As an interesting side note, not that it's really worth much in terms of this conversation, she was one of a triplet. Again, I don't know what her siblings went on to do. I did read that her father was opposed to her studying medicine, but she, insisted. And later in life, of course, he was very, very proud of her accomplishments and her work. So that was nice. Dr. Kübler-Ross, not an advocate of euthanasia in her heyday. However, my understanding is she, in the last 9 years of her life or something, between 1995 and 2004, somewhere in there, she suffered a series of strokes and was wheelchair bound and was suffering. And, was, again, from what I've read, just wanted it to end. So her opinions, perhaps, about euthanasia may have changed. And again, I don't know. I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist. I don't know enough about the subject to speak with any authority. When I had it in, freshman psychology or whatever it was, sophomore psychology, 40 years ago, it was a cursory piece of a much larger class. So I can't speak with any authority on it. Anyway, 50 years ago today, On Death and Dying was published and became part of the American landscape and, well, certainly the global landscape thereafter. And so while her roots may be from Europe, her work, and actually she did her residency and her advanced training in psychiatry and psychoanalysis here in the United States. Dr. Ross was a Swiss-American psychiatrist who contributed greatly to the field. And this year is the anniversary, and I just thought now was an appropriate time to bring this up and to say happy anniversary, such as it were, since it's been long enough for me since I lost my friends that it's not too terrible to talk about, but still recent enough that it has some meaning. So for what that's worth, folks, brilliant work. I think it's worth the time to at least read up about, if not actually read the entire work. But that's my opinion. If you got questions or comments, folks, leave them down in the comment section down below. I love hearing from all of you. I really do. I hope you've enjoyed this, and that if you weren't familiar with this work, that maybe I've helped in some way to contribute to your education. And if you're coping with loss or grief or with your own mortality, maybe this will help. I don't know, but it's certainly something to look at. And if you're new here, well, thank you for joining us. We're typically more upbeat than this, but it's just one of those things that happened 50 years ago that we're celebrating this year. So I hope you'll consider clicking subscribe to come along for the adventure, because we got lots more to show you. And as always, folks, well, thank you for watching.